we actually have Justyn Green, who's head of architecture at Versent, and Versent are a recent addition to the Telstra stable. So I'm going to take a load off and sit down with my two esteemed guests here on stage to sort of get things going, because we've got quite a lot to talk about. As we saw earlier on, so I talked about the overall sort of cloud adoption in the local marketplace. We're kind of sitting at about that sort of 46% of all workloads in the public cloud. We're also now seeing that there's a real increased focus on not necessarily the what, but the why. Why are we making these investments? What's the value back? How's it enhancing our capabilities? And those sort of things as well. So it really is top of mind for many of the audience. And I think that when we think about cloud as well in general, and that needs to sort of accelerate our modernisation efforts, a lot of it comes down to how that can help us, do things differently, innovate, if you like, in many ways, as well as optimise the environment. So I'd like to come to you first, Warren. You and I have had a lot of conversations over the last sort of year or two at various events and round tables. But I want to talk a little bit about the need to, how do we sort of balance that innovation and optimisation angle in general? So I guess my question to you, Warren, and I think particularly considering other organisations, but how can, the team here, how can we all really, balance that need for innovative cloud solutions, not necessarily just bog standard, with that imperative to optimise our existing infrastructure, for cost and efficiency? So is there a way we can kind of get that balance a little bit better, do you think?
Yeah, and I think it's a multi-factor approach that you have to use. But I mean, the very foundation is having the conversation in your organisation to understand the appetite for balancing those things. A lot of organisations either seem to, and the IT organisations in particular, tend to either make assumptions or not necessarily understand where that setting needs to be. So have that conversation. Then once you understand that position, there's an architectural element, so actually architecting your cloud environment so that it minimises the costs for early stage development for innovation. That can be things like architecting in shared services that are likely to be repeated across projects so that you're not redeveloping them. Things like making sure access to small and contained relevant data sets is there so that you don't get people going off and experimenting with large data sets, creating huge amounts of consumption, for example. And there's also instrumenting the environment. One of the real ways of managing that balance is to have transparency and visibility of costs, preferably in real time. So you need to architect these into your environment. Then on the governance side, making sure that you have the right governance models. I've been in organisations and worked with customers who've gone one way or the other. They've either used a very heavyweight traditional governance model and tried to make that work for innovation projects, or they've been innovation focused, and then as things scaled, they've struggled with cost control. So consciously looking at things like what are your governance models, the cadences that they operate, making sure that real-time data around usage, cost, etc. feeds into those, I think is really important. And the third element is the cultural and educational element. I think one of the most powerful things you can do is those people who are going to drive that innovation into the company, there's sort of a barrier to entry that you give them, which is they have to understand things like what actually are the key cost drivers architecturally in innovation models. Things like what's your regional strategy? What's your strategy to avoid lots and lots of data egress? That, for example, is going to end up costing you a lot of money. And what are the architectural guardrails for the organisation? So I think equipping those people with that understanding goes a long way, because no one goes into innovation trying to create an expensive solution or to create problems for the organisation. A lot of the time it's either lack of alignment on the government side or lack of awareness.
So tell me, obviously in your role, you're CTO of industries at a very large organisation itself, right? So you talked about that sort of need for alignment in many ways. What advice would you give people here in terms of, some steps to get that alignment, if you like, into particularly at that executive level as well? Because quite often, we face a challenge where we have fairly low levels of digital savviness in our leadership teams, that sort of thing. We need to articulate why technology is important and translate that to business as well. But what are some of the things you would do, I guess, within your organisation, to do that more effectively?
Absolutely, buy-in and engagement is a key part of it. And one of the pieces of language that a lot of the work you guys have done in ADAPT that we've brought back into the organisation is the two-in-the-box model, making sure that, to get that alignment, major projects, initiatives, changes need to be driven both by senior representation from the business and from IT. And that recognition that, in fact, that differentiation between the business and IT is an organisational fallacy, and what matters is the capability or the function that you're trying to create, and the stakeholders in that. So I think consciously creating those forums for that to happen, rather than just assuming that those conversations happen on the back end.
Okay, a great point. Justyn, let me come to you, in your role there at Versent as well. So, Warren talked a little bit, if you like, in terms of obviously the need to get that buy-in, but also in some ways taking a bit of an incremental approach to some of what we do. You mentioned that with the data side of things, Warren. So if we think about that, and we think about how we can scale success specifically, and I'm thinking about your role, obviously, head of architecture there. Considering how we sort of progress from, if you like, cloud pilots to more enterprise-wide sort of cloud adoption and usage, any thoughts on how we can scale this effectively? Because we don't all start off with the big bang, everything's in the cloud, that sort of thing. Quite often it is more of an incremental approach. Any thoughts on how we can get that right?
Yeah, look, I think one of the first things to consider is the mastery of change. So even before you start looking at any tooling or methods of change, you need to think about the fact that it's got to be an organisation-wide change, and you need to become masters in those processes first, because if the organisation is looking at such a cloud adoption roadmap, it needs to happen from the top down. And it doesn't have to be completely horizontal across the entire executive suite, but as long as that change is well thought through and well articulated, it doesn't have to be technical, then you can actually see where the value alignment with the business and the strategy of the business through to how the maturity of the platform can be used is actually really key. Really key.
I like that term, mastery of change. I haven't
Mastery of
heard
change.
that before. I'm going to be using that one. I like it. So with that said, when you think about that mastery of change concept, right? And Warren talked about this, and we heard it from Patrick as well. The need to really really shift cultural thinking as well within organisations as we change our approach to technology.
Yep.
And when you think about that mastery of change, I mean, would you say there's kind of almost a multi-pronged focus on that in terms of different layers within the organisation? Because it may well be that we've got to get the stakeholder buy-in at the senior leadership level, but we've also got to get the people who are impacted by the technology, their buy-in as well. So how would you sort of look at that, do you think?
Yeah, look, there's this classic term we have in definitely programs of work where we've got like the crucifix of accountability. So you've got people who are involved in the work.
You're giving me great terms, I like that.
Thank you, you're welcome.
All right, okay, sorry, Karen.
So like top to tail, people who are involved in whatever the major changes around the adoption, and everyone in between, right? They're going to be included, and that's actually quite close to the coalface around what's going to be going on for the organisation. But then there's also the associated tertiary people who are involved as well, who aren't directly involved, but they are associated with it in what they can consume. And so those consumers at the end of the day are going to be affected, and bringing them on the journey as well is actually part of that whole organisational cultural shift, because again, you could talk about tools and pipelines and everyone's happy because it's automated, but that only goes so far before people start to think about or comprehending what that changes for them. Do I get my stuff faster? Can I self-service? Can I actually use a platform that's actually going to be not just IT, but actually for me?
Okay.
And that's where that starts to evolve the thinking and the culture.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I guess building on that a bit more, and many of the team here today, and obviously other organisations I talk to, there's kind of almost an expectation now that they'll work more holistically with multiple vendors, not necessarily at that point level, but sort of building more sort of ecosystems, if you like. And I had a conversation with the CIO probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they were saying that there's almost an expectation that we'll work much more collectively within different partnerships. So a couple of things I want to talk about. Firstly, most people, obviously everybody here has heard of Telstra, probably many have heard of Versent as well. But Warren, if we think about partnerships, right, so why we're here sort of together, I guess would be a good thing. Then I want to touch a little bit more in terms of how we help our customers actually leverage partnerships more effectively. Warren? Yeah.
Yep. So, first of all, one of the things that really attracted us to Versent as an organisation and why we've been talking to them for a very long time about how we come together is the richness of their approach and the degree of complement to a lot of the skills that we have in the Purple organisation that we formed through previous acquisitions. We've been quite considered in the skills and capability set that we've been looking to bring together as an ecosystem across that. It would be fair to say that the Purple organisation had quite a strength around Microsoft and Azure. We have a very strong partnership there. Deep partnership with AWS as well, but for various reasons, maybe the skill set wasn't as strong. And I think it would be fair to say that the reverse was true in Versent. And I think bringing them together has created an incredible capability from that perspective. Also, one of the things that across all of the technology domains Telstra operates in is fundamental to our being is security, cyber security. And so if you look at some of the acquisitions that we've made, areas like Alliance Automation with their strength in operational technology and real strength in operational technology, cyber security, complementing some of our strengths in those areas, and the undoubted strength that Versent has around cloud cybersecurity and cybersecurity for hybrid models gives us that end-to-end security focus and capability stack that is one of our reasons for being.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's interesting, sort of touching a bit more on the security compliance side of things. And when we surveyed probably about 150 security leaders early this year, many of them told us they're actually spending more time on compliance and governance than they are on security. Right? Mm-hmm. I know it's quite, but on the other hand, they also said they feel that's actually making them more secure as well. But as we think,
I'm surprised more of them aren't saying that they're also spending a huge amount of time on culture as well.
Yeah,
because compliance is one of the key tools in driving security. Investing in compliance has a many-fold payback.
Yep.
But similarly, investing in culture and creating a cybersecurity aware culture in your organisation also has that multiplier. Mm-hmm. So I was, the research that you've published, I've found it a little strange that maybe the cultural side didn't rank as highly for them.
I would say, and Gabby will probably correct me here because I can't remember the exact percentage, but when we asked them about how much they're spending on like overall budget, where they're portioning budget, I think awareness and training was about 12%. What was that? 10. About 10% of their overall budget, which is significant.
Yeah.
And I think I made the point then that there's not many departments within any organisation that are spending that much on that. To your point, so it's absolutely critical that they're sort of uplifting awareness as well. Yep. But with that said, Justyn, kind of talking a bit more about that, when you think about this accelerated sort of cloud adoption, and obviously there's increased sort of governance expectations around cloud, whether it's around data sovereignty, data security, whatever it is to go with that. How do we make sure that we're sort of, if you like, strengthening our cloud governance and resilience capabilities without impacting agility? Because quite often they're kind of counter to each other, aren't they?
That's exactly right. Like it's the $64 million question. How do we make things modern, mature, strong, whilst also allowing the sandbox and innovation to continue to evolve without any of those impacts on productivity? Mm-hmm. There's three that really come to mind. So number one is really around ensuring that there's a balance between what the technology tooling is versus what the cloud platform modernisation is. So if your cloud platform is constantly being reiterated and a lot of the activity that you're spending in not just general BAU and the modernisation of your apps, but is also going forward with the actual cloud foundations, then you're able to ensure that those guardrails are elastic enough that they do continue to give those compliance guardrails well, but also you can have those sandbox environments. And predominantly for the purposes of ensuring that the output is aligned to the business value. I think we've all had developers who like to go out and build stuff just because they can.
Yeah.
No value.
Honestly, a few nodding heads around the room.
Yeah, I was one of them. So allowing that to happen within certain time boxes is important, but ensuring that it's not fully locked down to a point the policies of your security is actually breaking it. Number two is actually around ensuring that the funding mechanisms behind it are open, because obviously when you're continuing to evolve a platform, you're going to need input around people and the cadence of that technology being inputted regularly. So not just saying we've built a cloud foundations and we're done is actually probably a counter pattern to any of your innovation and also your cloud agility as well. And the last one, and it's an interesting one, is around your resilience with recent events. So ensuring that you're investing heavily in your resilience so that there is a way that you're not going to be taken out and the focus of your team is going to be focused around things that are critical rather than still allowing the BAU of your SRE and platform team to actually unlock value.
Okay. Well, building on that a bit more, because I want to pick up on the resilience piece as well, obviously for very current reasons, but obviously you're CTO across a number of different industries, obviously at Telstra in general. Many of those are kind of critical infrastructure. Obviously we saw airlines being impacted heavily, that kind of thing. I'm interested in terms of how you approach the the whole sort of resiliency conversation across sort of different industries. Is there kind of a common defining theme here, or do you really have to sort of go down into sort of very narrow levels related to specific industries in general? And of course, I guess the whole compliance thing comes into that as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarity across industries, but perhaps the way I described it is the lens they view it through is a little bit different. One of the things that I find in several of the industries I'm involved in, agribusiness, manufacturing, logistics, retail, for example, is some organisations assume things like the SOCI Act, the requirements of it, and the organisations that the government deem to be, or the functions the government deems to be subject to it, is static. It's not. It's continuously evolving. So, when I talk to major logistics companies, they fall into two camps, for example. There's one camp who are planning for, who either are fully subject to the Act at the moment or believe that they understand that they will be and they're already planning for that. And there are other organisations whose view on that is, well, we're not subject to that at the moment, so we don't need to do anything about it. Which means they're in for an incredibly painful journey in 3, 4, 5 years' time when that changes, because the federal government has made no bones about the fact that they will expand the remit of those requirements, and for perfectly good reasons. A lot of the requirements of the SOCI Act, for example, and for critical infrastructure are things that reasonable organisations would be doing or should be doing anyway. They're basically just good practice.
Okay. Justyn, coming to you on that one, I see you were nodding your head a bit in agreement there as Warren was talking. Any thoughts from your point of view as well, obviously, in terms of, do we almost sort of need to rethink resilience? I spoke earlier on about the need to sort of align our cyber resilience strategies more closely with overall sort of business resilience, but do you think the conversation's going to change?
I think it has to. It really does, because I was nodding because there's a personal story related to one of the logistics companies we have here in Australia that I worked on. And they went through the exact thing you were referring to, which was they treated the rules as future, and we'll get to it when we get to it, and they got popped. And so it brought in a new mandate for them, security first, that's job zero. But the thing is, they've spent the better part of 4 years now trying to really pull up their socks around security, heavy investment, heavy time, and even going back to resilience as well. Like, they understand that they can't have their operations down based on an event, because they were poorly aware of what they were going to do if something broke. So around the SOCI Act, but just treating compliance and overall methods that you need to be in line with whatever regulation is there is important even if you're not really audited or certified by it, you need to stick to it, because even if the widening of the scope comes in, you're already prepared. So I would have liked to know this customer prior to that they could have actually been a little bit more prepared, because they've spent 4 years trying to get ready.
Okay, interesting.
I will also say one of the differences I see across different industries is particularly those 4 industries I mentioned, which form a consistent and vital supply chain for the company, for the country. COVID kind of changed their perspective a little bit, and they became much more focused on resilience as a characteristic of an entire value chain rather than just within the walls of their organisation. With us moving on to a certain extent from COVID and in some different industries, I see a lot of organisations who fall into what I would say is the trap of focusing on resilience within their own walls. Almost every organisation is part of a value chain, and by doing that, you actually limit the amount of resilience that you can create. You actually do need to your point about ecosystem, have that conversation with your trading partners as well if you're going to create a robust environment.
And we saw that actually when we surveyed this sort of peer group last year, actually, in terms of kind of some of the key focus areas, and one of that, to your point, one of those was actually that sort of ecosystem resilience, making sure that was really strong. And I remember, I think probably about 2 or 3 years ago during the pandemic, I stood up here and said, business continuity as we know it is dead, right? It's now needs to be about business resilience, because I think the points you're making here is that business continuity is fine to react when a problem happens, right? But resilience is making sure we're ready for when that problem happens, and that hopefully we'll overcome it as well. So I think that certainly that conversation is going to change quite dramatically in time as well as we consider that. So with that said, obviously we talked a lot about various things in terms of sort of where we are today, but how do we kind of future-proof things, if that makes sense? Because, as I presented earlier on, the need to sort of modernise and reduce our reliance on legacy technology is kind of really a continuing focus for so many organisations. So how do we make sure that what we're doing today is kind of preparing us more effectively for the future, that we don't sit here in 4 years' time saying, oh God, I've got to modernise all this legacy technology? Any kind of thoughts? Is there a kind of silver bullet here, Warren, in terms of how we make sure that we're kind of future-proofing things?
There's no silver bullet, but I think there are a few things that you need to do. I talked about measurement and instrumentation before. I think that is absolutely a key part of it. Measure and as close as you can to real time, and expose that data very transparently so that you have a shared understanding across the organisation, and you can have those conversations around, is what we're doing performing, or is it starting to drift away from what we intended? I think having the courage to regularly challenge your governance framework, your key architectural frameworks. That's not to say, continually upend them and create chaos, but have the courage to just regularly test them and understand whether they're still performant, whether they are what you need or not. And the other thing is, particularly in terms of cloud strategy and modernisation strategy, focus on functionality, not technologies. As a technologist myself, as is pretty much everyone in the room here, it's very easy to fetishize particular technologies. The best approach is to keep it at that functionality level, which then helps you really understand what your options are and give you the ability to change within those depending on what that measurement and the analysis of it is telling you.
I guess also to your point there, when you think about focusing on functionality rather than technology, by doing that, that's going to help us with those sort of cultural challenges that you spoke about earlier on as well, right? Because we're able to articulate things in the right sort of language internally as well.
Yeah, and I think it also helps that conversation with the rest of the business, because speaking in terms of functionality and hierarchies of functionality is perhaps a language that they're more familiar with rather than the pure technologies.
Justyn, I'm interested, obviously you talked to lots of organisations as well. Anything sort of stands out from your point of view in terms of organisations, you don't need to name the company, but who've done a really good job kind of future-proofing themselves? Does anything sort of come to mind?
Yeah, so we've just completed probably March or April of this year with the energy company in one of the states up north, who actually went on this journey because they specifically had different pockets of tech debt, and it was all consuming and was quite difficult to get their head around. And so we went in there with an architecture uplift because they knew how to do code, they knew how to build cloud, they just didn't know how to bring it all together. And so a lot of these different pockets were actually competing with one another. Who's building the best code base, who's actually making it right here and there and everywhere. And so working with them, we were able to actually strip that all back and say, guys, we need to think about your methods, but actually patterns versus code. Code is code, but if you have a pattern that's actually human readable across all parts of the business, then you're actually able to sell it and actually get buy-in. And then they can actually inject their own flavor onto it, because if someone who's not technical can say this pattern is or isn't going to be valuable for the different part of the business, then at least they're actually contributing. And if someone feels as though they're contributing and they own it, it means that they actually want to actually do more for it. If they don't understand it, then they'll just be like you technology people take care of it. So once we broke those walls down, we were able to actually start building out a bit of a module library that at the moment I think they've just passed like 32 gold master modules that can build anything. So that particular company is already getting to the point where they're running to the start line and they're about to start properly, and then they're going to start self-service and all the other things that they can do.
Interesting. So I just want to build on that a bit more, particularly around the future side of things. So we then think about sort of AI and data readiness. I presented earlier on that a large percentage of the team here are kind of sort of embarking on AI strategies within an organisation. We saw CIOs who we surveyed earlier this year. A very high percentage of those also said they planned to build their own LLMs to sort of enable this, if you like. I think it was about 27% expect to build their own LLMs. So that could be in public cloud or in-house, whatever. But as we think about that, what do we need to do to make sure that our cloud infrastructure is actually primed, if you like, for AI? Obviously, there's the big data focus, but then more generally, is there anything we should be thinking about in terms of doing a little bit differently, do you think?
One of the main things that we're talking to customers right now is around the current data ecosystem could be quite a polyglot of all sorts of data sources and how they're connected to one another. And so one of the major central focuses they should think about first is what is that data quality and how is it going to be cleaned as it goes into whatever AI service you're considering? Because obviously everyone here may have already thought that AI is going to be a valuable tool. So having it aligned to your business strategy is job zero. But then, like they always say, garbage in, garbage out. And it's actually amplified quite a lot if it's in an AI model that's actually going to continue to practice and learn on itself. More garbage, more garbage, more garbage, more garbage out. So ensuring that data set is clean and completely linked to what your data sources are is incredibly important. All of the APIs and portals and things you can slap on the top is just sort of tertiary. That data set has to be clean.
Okay. Well, what about from your point of view? I mean, I'm sure you have a lot of conversations internally as well as with customers as well.
Yep.
And any sort of advice for the team here in terms of making sure that their cloud environments are fit for purpose, if you like, when it comes to AI moving forward?
So certainly data quality and how you architect for your data is a fundamental piece. Otherwise, it can completely blow out either cost or performance, neither of which you particularly want. But I think one of the other key things is to actually get considered around where you want to use AI. I see plenty of organisations who are planning on deploying AI in some cases because of significant amounts of work, in other cases because the board has told them that they're doing AI, and it would be nice to see where the AI is. But actually spending that time to look at your key processes and functions in your organisation and firstly understand where you would get significant benefit if you built more intelligence into those. That's the first step, and then the second step is to consider, where is AI as part of that intelligence the right tool to use for that. But focusing on the processes and the functions and where you need that uplift in intelligence and capability around them is fundamental.
Yep. You remind me, you and I were on a round table about 6 months ago, do you remember? And one of the CIOs said, walked into the board, and one of the board members said, "Show it to me." He said, "Show me what?" He said, "Show me the AI." Yes, right. So those sort of classic conversations. But just before we sort of wrap up, I'd love to come to you last here, Warren. You know, you talked about sort of performance and metrics. Can you perhaps share any examples of organisations where they've been able to sort of leverage KPIs and metrics quite effectively to demonstrate that value of the cloud?
Yeah, I can actually talk about internally in Telstra and the journey that we've been in. I think early on in our cloud journey, like many organisations, we made the mistake of focusing on velocity metrics. You know, for example, how many VMs have we migrated to the cloud this month? You know, 1,000 or whatever. Yes, that gives you a little bit of useful information, but understanding the impact metrics on that. So has it actually reduced the cost of particular functions that you deliver through cloud? If your focus on it is on innovation, have you effectively reduced the cycle times around innovation? How many of your innovations are able to make it through into production? Has that rate increased? And looking at it at a portfolio level. So what I would counsel is focus as much as you can on impact metrics rather than activity or velocity metrics. Some of that comes down to, as humans, we tend to measure what's easy to measure rather than measuring what's the thing that actually matters, and velocity metrics are typically easier to measure